Leaders of the BRICS group of nations are meeting in Johannesburg. Brazil, Russia, India, China and South Africa are home to around 40% of the world's population. President Putin is not there, though. Russia is being represented by Foreign Minister Sergey Lavrov, since Mr. Putin is subject to an international arrest warrant for alleged war crimes related to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. BRICS leaders will discuss a possible expansion of the five-nation bloc. Some observers believe China is keen to develop a global counterweight to the Western-led G7 group of leading democracies. So here's what some of the leaders have had to say on the subject of expansion.
We need to be global partners in upholding global justice. We need to strengthen strategic collaboration, practice true multilateralism, and promote the expansion of the representation and voice of southern countries in global governance.
South Africa and China have similar views with regard to the expansion of BRICS membership, and we look forward to the discussions that we are going to have with other BRICS leaders.
I think BRICS has the possibility to expand. I know China wants to, South Africa wants to, Russia wants to, and we want to. Everybody wants this, and it's not hard to enter.
Well, let's look at this with Ali Wyne, who's a senior analyst focusing on US-China relations for Eurasia Group's global macro-geopolitics practice. And Professor Oliver Stunkel is a political analyst at the School of International Relations in São Paulo, Brazil. Welcome both. We'll come to the issue of expansion in a moment. First, let's talk about what members believe BRICS is for. Oliver Stunkel, these five countries have some very specific objectives, which I suppose you could categorise as casting off the shackles of Western dominance.
Hello, yes, absolutely. I think despite the numerous differences between BRICS countries and divergences and disagreements, particularly between India and China, there is something that unites them, which is their reluctance and wariness vis-à-vis US leadership. Member countries believe that strengthening BRICS helps them increase their leverage when sitting down with Washington. It helps them constrain the United States to some extent, also strengthen ties among member countries. An often overlooked issue is that countries like Brazil knew very little about China 20 years ago, and the BRICS grouping has helped in that sense establish ties. But of course, the big disagreement or the big question is whether they can find a way to expand that is agreeable to all of them. There's been rumors, for example, that China would be interested in adding Pakistan, something India would certainly dislike. And I would say India and Brazil have been a bit reluctant when it comes to more anti-Western additions to the club. So there's a lot of suspense. Nobody knows if expansion will actually take place. But I think there's something that unites all these countries. They believe that organizing these meetings and articulating discussions will help them adapt to a post-American world, a world in which there's numerous poles of power, and craft the details of this new multipolar order.
So, Ali Wyne from the Eurasia Group, we just heard Oliver there talking about this group wanting to shake off US leadership. How have they been able to resist being dominated by China?
Well, first, I want to say what a pleasure it is to be commenting alongside Oliver. And for those of you who haven't read his recent article in The Economist on this very topic, I would commend it to all of you. There are important divisions in the group, and I think that there are two judgments that are true. The first judgment is that all five member countries want to exercise greater agency in world affairs. They want a more multipolar international system, but there are important divisions. I think China is in favor of rapid expansion to demonstrate its growing diplomatic heft. Russia wants to cast off or dispel abusers or disabuse individuals of the notion that it is diplomatically isolated. And on the other hand, I think if you look at Brazil, if you look at India, if you look at South Africa, they take a more cautious approach. They favor a more multipolar international system, but they don't want the BRICS to be seen as an explicitly anti-US or anti-West grouping. And so I think that those divisions about how the member states want the group to be conceived will continue to loom over the summit over the next few days.
OK, and so what would I think there's about 40 countries who formally or informally want to join this group. What's in it for them? Perhaps you'd like to pick this up, Oliver, and then we'll come to you again, Ali.
Well, BRICS is a recognized brand. I mean, it's it's a status booster in a way to be a BRICS country. After all, Brazil hasn't grown for a decade, but in part because it's a BRICS country, some people still refer to it as an emerging power. So it's a useful thing to have that, the seal of approval of this brand created by Goldman Sachs 20 years ago. In addition, it gives you, as I said, it gives you greater leverage when negotiating with Washington. It allows you to get regular FaceTime with Xi Jinping. And not only that, I mean, over the past years, there have been at times up to 100 BRICS-related meetings per year, which means that ministries and the bureaucracies get to engage with China, which is quite useful as well. Now, the concern, of course, of countries like Brazil and India is that if you add lots of countries, then the club will inevitably be less exclusive, and that status-boosting capacity of being a BRICS member may not be the same as that it used to be.
And Ali, does BRICS actually have a track record of success? Is there anything you can point at other than just existing and being there to say, well, these are good reasons, one, for you to want to join, and two, for the world to listen to us?
So one, you can point to the BRICS Bank. It's still, I would say, it's in its kind of infant stages, but I think that there's momentum if you look at the current members of the new development bank, if you look at prospective members and those who have expressed interest in joining the bank. So that's one tangible achievement. But I want to build on the point that Oliver made about branding. So when Jim O'Neill, the economist from Goldman Sachs, when he coined the term BRICS, so at the time South Africa, this was in 2001, South Africa joined the group in 2010. In 2001, the 5 member countries represented not even 10% of the global economy. Today, they represent a little over a quarter. And so there is a branding, there's a prestige, a cachet associated with membership. The problem is, though, that for those current members, they don't want to see their influence diluted. So the larger the group gets, the less cachet there is for individual members. And so what I expect that we will see over the coming days is not a finalized decision on admitting new members, but perhaps more concrete discussions around criteria for expansion, criteria for membership. And I'll just make one last point. Even though obviously we're currently talking about the BRICS summit, I think it's important to look at the summit taking place within a wider aperture. If you look at the interest among dozens of countries in joining the BRICS, if you look at the expansion of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, if you look at the growing interest in the deliberations of the G20, I think if you adduce all of those developments and look at them holistically, what we see is the emergence of an international system in which middle powers in developing countries, they want greater sway, they have greater agency, and they want to contribute to a new global architecture.
So, Oliver, if you could pick up that point that Ali made there then about criteria. What are the entry criteria at the moment? Presumably democracy or adherence to the rule of law, not on the list. Yeah, well, so the thing is, the BRICS countries were put together by Goldman Sachs in a way. I mean, the acronym stuck in a way was quite successful in the financial markets in the 2010s. And then Russia at the time was quite eager to create a political group along those lines. China was eager to have an African member state in order to increase the BRICS grouping's legitimacy. Now, South Africa is a much smaller economy than the other member states, of course. So I think it's going to be very difficult to articulate clear criteria because that will box the BRICS into a way that they can't violate their, the rules they've created. So another option would be that, things will be more informal. Like, for example, the G20, which is currently discussing of whether to add the African Union and to make it actually the G21. I mean, there's no specific rule about that. I think it's going to be always an informal debate. And really, it will depend a lot on, I think, what China's interest is. After all, it was also China that was responsible for adding South Africa back in the day. OK, so Ali, so does it matter then? I'm just trying to work this out. When you have the Beijing consensus that was talked about there, this lack of belief in the free market, a belief in a state-led growth, more money for global north, do Western institutions view BRICS as a threat yet?
I don't think that they currently assess it as a coherent threat, and I think for some of the reasons that we've been discussing. I think that the BRICS are certainly emblematic of a zeitgeist among middle powers, among large stretches of the developing world. Again, that is the shared desire among a growing number of countries for greater multipolarity, but there are important divisions among the BRICS. And as we were discussing earlier, I think China and Russia, they have a shared and very intense animus towards the West and the United States in particular. But Brazil, India, and South Africa, yes, they want to enhance their range of relationships, but they don't want the bloc to be perceived as explicitly anti-U.S. or anti-West. And so long as those internal divisions persist, I think that the ability of the BRICS to achieve geopolitical coherence will be constrained. But certainly, I think Western observers recognize that there is a shared desire among a growing number of countries for a different configuration of international relations. So Western observers will be watching this summit with interest. I don't yet sense that they view the BRICS as a coherent geopolitical challenge.
Right, and on expansion, where would your money be for the next countries to join BRICS? We'll start with you, Ali, and then come to you, Oliver.
So there are many countries that, of course, have expressed interest in joining. I think the two candidate countries that have been discussed increasingly often are Indonesia and Saudi Arabia. And I think that Indonesia and Saudi Arabia, importantly, they represent two regions that the BRICS doesn't presently account for, respectively Southeast Asia and the Middle East. So Indonesia and Saudi Arabia appear to be sparking a fair bit of interest. But again, to be determined, and I would just reiterate that I wouldn't expect that this summit will reach any final decisions on admitting new members.
Oliver, would those be on top of your list?
Yes, actually, I think the two also, they tick the box in a very important sense. For Brazil and for India, it would not be interesting to add countries whose governments are explicitly anti-Western, like Iran, for example, or Venezuela. So these countries don't really change profoundly the overall stance of BRICS. Many other countries that have formally or informally asked for accession do not really fit in. Mexico, strategically and commercially too close to the United States. Turkey, part of NATO. Some other countries aren't really, growing particularly fast. Argentina is in the midst of a political transition. So I think those two countries are fairly safe bets. And both are countries which I think, again, would be seen positively by those who don't want the BRICS to become an explicitly anti-Western bloc.
All right. Fascinating. We'll leave it there. Thank you so much for joining us. Oliver Stunkel from Brazil's School of International Relations, Ali Wyne from the Eurasia Group. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.